welcome to Tabletop Tommies. I'm Johnny.
And I'm Phil.
And today we're going to talk about starting an army for bolt action. The do's and don'ts, wants and needs. Phil, why this? Why now?
So we've had a few requests from people recently to talk about how we went about choosing an army, or more than one army in our cases, and also the things they might want to think about when choosing an army. And secondly, with Warlord Games releasing 3 brand new starter armies recently, it's an opportunity to highlight what's come out recently and give our listeners something to think about as we get towards Christmas.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a, is this the time to start French? Je ne sais pas. So Phil, what's a good reason to start an army?
So I think from my perspective, and I'll talk about how I sort of chose my armies, there needed to be a hook that got me into it, either for historical reasons or for personal reasons, or because I found a unit in maybe a new campaign book, for example, that I was really excited about. That made me then read up a bit more about it if I didn't know about it. And from there, I then jumped into actually buying and building an army that around that unit, or around a platoon, or around a particular theatre or a particular battle.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people who start armies just based on either sort of a relative who was involved in a particular campaign, or just because they've read about a particular campaign that's interesting. And yeah, I think that's a perfectly valid reason to start an army.
What about you, Johnny?
So for me, I got into bolt action as a game primarily. Obviously, the World War II theme is something I've been interested in for a long time. Sort of harken back, Band of Brothers, Saving Private Ryan, all that sort of like classic Hollywood media. And generally, I mean, it is probably the most interesting period of history to me. And so it is sort of the ideal, if you're looking for a war game and you're mildly interested in World War II, it's the perfect game, isn't it? And so when I started, it was very much based on, I thought you have to start with a classic Brits versus Germans showdown.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I was planning to start Brits when I got into it, but Sam, who actually got me into the game, had already started with Brits. And so, of course, what that meant is I had to be the Germans.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. And so that's how I chose, based on the fact that I thought we have to recreate sort of all those famous battles, etc., which means someone's got to be the Germans. And unfortunately, I'm second in, so it has to be me.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's my first army. But I have to admit, it is the first of many. So, I mean, how many armies have you got now, Phil?
Fully painted, ready to go on the tabletop. I think it's 7 or 8.
At 1,000 points or higher?
At least 1,000 points. And I've been playing bolt action for less than 2 years.
Wow, that's points per year. You're well past me, because
it's disposable time and a little bit of disposable income, clearly.
Yeah, I mean, the good thing with bolt action is it's not an expensive game to get into, especially if you're willing to take second-hand models and sort of zhuzh them up. It is a very cheap war game compared to something like 40k or one of the other ones.
So, I started with British Commandos, and that was because there's a family member who's a retired major. And also I'm from Portsmouth, and there's a big, commando legacy in Portsmouth. So that was my first army. And then similar to you, because I didn't have any mates to play bolt action, I then bought the Germans myself, so that I had both Germans and British. So I got into it, from a personal sort of connection. My British Burma army is similar. My great uncle was a Chindit. And that's what got me interested in the Burma theatre and the Burma campaign. I then expanded that Burma force by making it more competitive and bringing along our favourite guys from Nepal.
Yeah. And so your first army was historical reasons, basically, family historical reasons. Your second army, still sort of historical reasons, so you can do. But then once you get to that third to 7th or 8th army,
yeah.
What are you choosing based on after that?
So some of them, like I've got a US Airborne Army, for example, and that was picking up the 30-man infantry box set really cheaply, and then just keeping an eye on eBay and other places to expand it out, and painted them up based on Band of Brothers. So that was sort of influenced by popular culture, effectively. My French, Free French North Africans was because I really liked the Foreign Legion, really liked the kepis and the way they looked. I liked the Perry miniatures. Started reading about the actual, theatre and main battles. And that was kind of rule of cool more than anything. Having had a British Burma army, it seemed natural to get a Japanese army. So that was more about having something that fitted the theme. Obviously, Japanese can be very competitive, so there was definitely an element of having another competitive force to play with, and not just a British Burma Gurkha force. So it tends to be, for me, it could be an interesting unit, or it could be a cheap deal. You see some forces reduced online, or maybe something pops up on eBay and there's a fully painted army. I haven't gone down that route, but I know others have. You pick up an army for cheap on eBay, and then that's something else to add. I've said before on the pod, I really enjoy painting and modelling as well as playing. So for me, I've got 7 or 8 armies, but it's because I spend a lot of my evenings, weekends painting, because I find it quite relaxing and something I do after work, sort of thing.
Yeah, I find that I don't have much time for painting now. There was a time when I used to really enjoy sitting down, planning the whole army out, painting it up from scratch. Mm-hmm. And now I just don't really have much time to paint. And so I haven't really started a new army for some time now. I've got some French that are still waiting to get painted. And I got them because when they added the early war motorcycles, and you could have all those motorcycles in one list, because it's a 3-for-1 deal on the selector, I really like the idea of that, because that does fit my play style. So when I was playing 40k, it was very much stuff in transports, rushing forward, get right in your face. Sort of, it's basically death or glory, because either you roll over them or they walk over you, because it's the classic glass hammer. And so that is my play style. And so after I moved on from the Germans, it was a case of, well, just trying out different things. So I tried out Hungarians for a little bit.
Okay.
I then got US. So the US, actually, they started before the Hungarians, sorry. And I got them because of like the classic Hollywood, like I'm going to storm the beaches, do D-Day.
And that's regular US, and sort of Rangers and regular US.
Well, I got the Marines because, like you said, I got them on a good deal because there was a sprue sale on the sprues. And so originally I was going to do European US. That's a weird sentence. I was going to do the US Army in Europe. Yeah. But when the Marines came up, I thought, this is still really cool. And the Pacific isn't something I know much about. So actually, let's jump in, buy all these Marines. And I bought sort of like 60 infantrymen, put together like 5 infantry squads, a lieutenant, a sniper, a couple of bazookas, a couple of forward air observers, like the classic nothing but infantry platoon. Yeah. And then that slowly evolved into what I play now, which is like 5 flamethrowers and 5 dodges.
Flamethrowers and dodges, yeah. Which sounds similar to what you were saying about 40k in terms of rush forward and death or glory. Yeah, glass hammer. Yeah.
Well, this is what I've said on a number of occasions. I'm not sure if I've said it on the pod, but even if flamethrowers were rubbish and bolt action, I'd probably still be running them, because there's nothing more cool than you rush forward in your transport, the guys load out, and then you hose someone down with the flamethrower. And then sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But it's probably the most fun I find in the game, sort of the high risk, high reward strategies that. I find when it's like, when people play very sort of cautiously and tactically, and then it comes down to a single 6 on the mortar, get you that extra victory point that takes you into a win rather than a draw. I just don't find that as exciting, because it's like, oh, well, I might have got the 6 rather than you, or vice versa. And so it's not, I don't feel like there wasn't much strategy there.
Yeah. Okay. So there's definitely one way into the game, or one way into an army is that historical, maybe personal connection. Okay. Another way in would be looking at your playstyle. And maybe wanting to have a different playstyle to an existing army, or if you're starting out from scratch, or if you're jumping over from a different game system, it may be that there's a playstyle that works in a particular game system, and you want to see if you can adopt the same playstyle in bolt action.
Yeah, and I mean, when you're starting a new army, I always think it's good to try a completely different playstyle to where you currently are, because otherwise you're just playing the same thing in a different hat, and so you might as well try something completely new. And so for me, I think if I went to something like a gun line, which actually my Germans, I do sometimes run like that with like Nebelwerfers, Panzerwerfer 42s, heavy mortar, take it in dual platoon, have 3 in each platoon. That kind of thing is how I would play Germans. Trying to replicate my US with my Germans, I find is basically just, it's a bit pointless, because also the Germans don't do it in quite the same way. And so I might as well do it with the US.
I'm laughing because I had a similar conversation with someone recently where I was trying to justify why having a Gurkha army, a Japanese army, and a Free French army full of Senegalese was playing 3 different armies. And the person went, they're all just assault armies. I was like, well, they are, but there are some differences.
It's like tweaks. It's a bit like playing Brits with a different national characteristic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Actually, the gun line, the French are good for the gun line as well, aren't they? Because you can have the free howitzer plus an extra howitzer. If dual platoons allowed, you can take triple howitzer. That's always good fun.
And you can do that with some of the minor Axis nations, can't you? Because of the Axis support rule. So rather than getting an additional armoured vehicle, you can add on the artillery unit to expand out the artillery and mortars that you can already take.
Yeah, so I guess if you're interested in gun lines, French, Germans, or German adjacent nations.
Yeah. Aligned with Germany.
Yeah. Well, I mean, literally the countries next door in the Bolt Action rule set are very similar in that they can all steal the German equipment.
Yeah.
And assault-wise, I think you've listed all the assault ones, the Japanese, your Gurkhas, anything where you can have lots of tough fighters or you've got some special rule that boosts you in combat.
Yeah.
Are there any that I've missed there that are good assaulters?
So,
I know one. Oh, sorry, go on.
No, after you.
No, you go, because...
I'm going to save it.
Oh, you're going to save it. Okay. So the one that I'm thinking, I hope it's not the one you're thinking of, is the Polish Lancers. So they are very good in close quarters as well. It's a tough one because your national characteristics are, they're good. Like, don't get me wrong, they're not bad, but they're not like British level good.
Yeah.
And so you're very much relying on that cavalry winning the day for you. And anything with horses tends to be quite good in close quarters.
And obviously the Polish horses, you dial them up to 11.
Yeah.
Not just cavalry, but super cavalry.
But what's nice is they cancel your Gurkhas out, don't they? Because half my attacks, but it's fine because I started with twice as many. So win-win.
So the skirmish build is something which I have looked at, and I've played a little bit with my regular US infantry, but I just find that it doesn't have the oomph that you need to kind of see the game through. Yeah,
when we say skirmish build, like what are we saying is our sort of like our what's the word for like our definitive case? Like what's a great example of a skirmish build? Because to be honest, people throw this around, but even I'm not convinced that like people really know what they mean when they say a skirmish build. What are we talking about here?
So I think for me, it's an army where you've got quite a few infantry units who are having quite a few dice that you're putting out, but you're not tooling them up, or the units don't have inherent rules that encourage you to rush forward and assault, for example, or you're not adding in your engineers and in your trucks and all that kind of stuff. So, because of the fire and maneuver special rule, obviously US are one that we often talk about in terms of a skirmish build. You can do the same with Chindits with the British because they get the fire and maneuver rule.
Yeah, I think this is actually what I would often just refer to as sort of your generalist list, where like you don't have one specific trick. It's sort of you've got a little bit of everything, and it's sort of it moves around, and you have to play quite strategically. The Finns are quite like this, where sort of you've got a few little things, but none of them are sort of like a razor unit good. So like whereas the flamethrower build, when that goes off, you're removing a unit at a time. With the Finns, so I recently played against the Polish cavalry, and I didn't have anything to kill them with basically because this is veteran horses who can recce. So if you ever did get anything good on them, they're just going to run away anyway. And it was a case of you just have to put the pins on. And I've got 5 infantry squads with just pistols and a couple of Panzerfaust. Not pistols, rifles and a couple of Panzerfaust. And they were just like, I'm going to put 3 pins on this squad and hopefully that's enough to make them fail a test. Now I'll put 3 pins on the one that's slightly further away. And so I suppose the Finns are probably your classic skirmish list.
I guess airborne with stubborn would be a similar thing. If you're not equipping them with SMGs so they're becoming tough fighters, you're essentially sitting there, hopefully in cover, putting out pins, like you say, but not necessarily having the oomph to finish off a unit. You're effectively hoping to concentrate your fire onto a unit with 2 or 3 of your own units, stick some pins out, hope that your enemy's units fail their checks and therefore end up going down, and you're nullifying the opposition that way, rather than just blowing them off the board, either through mass amounts of firepower or by assaulting.
Yeah, and I think it struggles in a tournament setting, this sort of skirmish idea, because you need those big sort of delete a unit moments for some of the missions. Like playing meet and engagement, if you're playing someone who's quite good and all you've got are sort of like rifles and machine guns, you'll never be able to kill that last man. Because as soon as the squad starts to look a bit hairy, it'll run away, hide away. Yeah. And so you only get sort of 1 or 2 good rounds of shooting on it before suddenly it hides. And so That's why I'm not a big fan of playing that type of army generally. I like to have something where when it goes off, it removes units.
Mm-hmm. So something that neither of us play is the Horde army.
Well, my French are a bit hoardy. I did at one point put together a 30 dice French list, didn't I?
You didn't do very well because you played it against me.
Yeah, I know. And then I sacked it because the problem
and
was...
then you sacked it off.
The classic problem was exactly why I don't play Hordes very often, because I realised it was going to be a real faff to play in a tournament setting because you've got so many models, so many dice. If your opponent doesn't play as quickly as you play, you're going to really struggle for time. And even you're having to play faster than you usually are, I would say, especially once you get to 30 dice. You're playing faster than you normally would. If your opponent is slower than you're expecting, you're not going to get many turns in. And so that was one of the big reasons I sacked it off, alongside the fact that, again, like the skirmish thing, it didn't have anything that could just knock something out. You were constantly playing like, oh, well, I don't care if you pin this squad because I've got another 29 squads. And then I'd put a few pins out, but equally I'd never kill a unit. And so you get lucky with a mortar, take out a couple of my units. Oh, no, I've probably lost the game.
But the classic idea of a horde, which is your squads of 10, 11, 12, 11, 12 and plus inexperienced troops moving forward, your Soviets, maybe your French with the extra unit. It's certainly not something that you or I play often. I've thought about it and I play against it a lot locally, but it just doesn't work for me. And yet you see it being very successful for some people.
Yeah, and I find it too frustrating because normally if you are doing that, you got inexperienced. And I find it too frustrating failing order tests consistently. I mean, I don't mind failing a few because I don't take a fully veteran army. And so it's expected that I'll fail a few. But when you're failing like really basic one-pin order tests constantly, it's really tiresome.
And thinking about the armies that you have, Johnny, is there a style of play that you don't currently either have the army for or currently don't play with the units that you have thought about?
That's a good question. Not really. I mean, I've played all of these. As I say, my Finns are quite skirmishy. I've got the gunline Germans and French I can run as gunline. Assault, I've actually got some Brits. But the funny thing is, actually, I run my Brits not as an assault build. So I do run Paragurkas, but I run them as a defensive unit. And so I'm using my other stuff. I take a couple of squads of engineers, maybe some Stuarts if I really want to do well. And then my Gurkhas basically just act as a roadblock where you put them where you don't want them to go. And even if it's just a squad of 5 Gurkhas, well, they can't flame them. If I go down, the rifles aren't really going to do much to them. Are you going to charge them? Not really. Maybe it's once you get down to sort of 2 or 3 Gurkhas you might think about, but 5 Gurkhas, even a 10-man veteran squad's going to think twice about charging it. And so the assault build isn't one that I hugely play. I would quite like to try some Japanese at some point because I think that would be a good one.
Yeah.
I mean, is there anything you're not playing that you're thinking about?
Yeah, like I just said, if I was to start bolt action again and if I was to think about the armies I have, the army I don't have, which from a competitive perspective I probably should, is a Soviet army. And I just can't get my head around either making it work or finding something that I want to use in a Soviet force. And it's the whole rule of cool thing, or there being a unit or a model that really attracts my attention and makes me want to read up about it, find out a bit more about it, and is also pretty good on the table. Yeah.
I've thought about running Soviets so many times because their triple anti-tank slot options are brilliant. Just again as roadblocks, because if you can stop a tank coming at you, that opens up a lot of avenues for you. But I always find myself leaning towards the US build with all the flamethrowers, but just not as efficiently. And so I end up just scrapping it quite quickly. And the only thing that really draws me to it is I'd love to do a Katusha platoon at some point where it's 5 Katusha. It's not super competitive, I don't think. I mean, you'd probably upset some people because there will be games when you're going to roll lots of 6s.
You would,
and you just roll over someone. But equally, there'll be games where their rifles roll 6s and knock out your 5 Katusha in like 2 turns. And so it is a bit of a balance, but I just think it's so cool having trucks with rockets on the back. Like...
Which moves us nicely into maybe the third way of choosing an army, which is that rule of cool. Which is where you find there's a particular unit or a particular model that you really want to see on the table. Yeah,
exactly. I love a Katusha.
So for me recently, it's been the Cossacks. So with Case Blue coming out and looking at the Cossacks, I'm currently painting up both mounted and foot slogging Cossacks for use in the German army. I've got quite a big winter German army, which can be both late war and mid war. But I just don't find it exciting to play. But for some reason, the Cossacks in Case Blue have got me excited again, to the point where I've just bought a load of mounted and dismounted Cossacks in order to use them in a mid-war Eastern Front German force.
Well, they've got good rules as well.
They are pretty useful. They're not terrible.
There's things that I really think are cool, but I'm very reluctant to run.
Mm-hmm.
So I used to always run a Satan, the M3 Stuart with the flamethrower turret, because I think that's really cool, especially when you've got all the engineers and then you've got the Satan. But I find flame tanks aren't that good. They're quite expensive. They're a bit... You've got to get close, and then usually, let's say you get within 9 inches of the enemy, you're then probably on moved, long range, 5s. Means 2/3 of the time you miss anyway, and then your tank's just sort of sat there in the middle of the battle. And so that's one that I think's really cool and could be really good, but I just never quite got my head around a way to make it game winning, really.
The Centaur is like that for me with the Commandos. It's so iconic as a tank for D-Day for the Commandos, but it's 200 odd points. Commandos are expensive as they are. So if you're paying 1,000 points and a fifth of your army is a medium howitzer with no other MGs, you're kind of limiting yourself at that point. Then you throw in some veteran commandos with tough fighters, and they're like, oh, look, I've got 9 dice at 1,000 points. So this is going to be fun, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it is so iconic. And I absolutely love playing my commandos with a Centaur. They've never done well at an event because you just can't build them competitively at that points cost.
Nah, the Buffalo's the same. I absolutely love the Buffalo. Either you load it up with loads of men or you load it up with a transport, put something in the transport, you do the old Russian doll. Amazing. Really cool, but not effective, is it? It's good like down the club if it's sort of like a friendly game, but you start taking it to tournaments where people have sort of optimized their lists and you've paid 100 odd points for this one transport with a couple of machine guns just so you can do this one cool trick where everyone gets out the one clown car.
Yeah.
It's not that competitive.
Yeah. Italians are another nation that I really want to be good. Like, I love the models. I love the aesthetics. Obviously, there's a massive range now that Warlord have released over the last 12 months or so. And, with Case Blue, they are better. Absolutely. The new rules are good. And we've got the new cavalry unit and so on. But they're just not good enough to entice me in. Like, I don't want to, I don't want to spend the time and money, building and painting an Italian army that I would love to paint, but then I'd probably rarely play them. Yeah.
And that is a big problem, isn't it? If you build something and then it's like, every time you put it on the table, oh no, I just don't want to see it. Oh, there is one other reason to choose an army that I've just thought of as we've been talking there.
Okay.
Which is scarcity. And so
yes,
a big thing. So the reason I started playing the Finns in the first place was I got tired of going to tournaments and facing the same armies over and over again. And so what I realized was I was part of the problem because I had Germans, US and Brits basically at this point. And so I thought, this is silly. I should pick a minor. And then actually I did do Hungarians first, but it just feels like playing Germans a lot of the time. And so that didn't feel as unique. And then also, they weren't that good. And so I knew I was never going to take them to like lots of tournaments. And so I tried the Finns and they are good. And you don't see them that often. And so rather than being part of the problem, I like to think I'm now part of the solution.
I remember going to my first beachhead and there was a lovely North Africa French force, which was being run as a Vichy French force. And at that point, I took my commandos at that point. And I remember going home literally on the Sunday from Beachhead and ordering a bunch of, I ordered the Battle of the Bulge book, first of all, because I thought, do you know what? I'm going to play late war French, late war Northern Europe French. Ordered a bunch of US bits to kit bash, which is effectively how I ended up with a US regular platoon, because I bought them for free French and then just transferred them across to the US. But I remembered that Beachhead army with the North African Free French, like, that's what I want to do. And that, then you start looking at the Perry models and at the time I bought them, Wargames Atlantic were the only option. So I got the Senegalese, from that box set, because I still, to be honest, still don't see many North African French forces at all. You might see some more with the recent French plastics coming out from Warlord, but they're still quite rare at this stage.
Yeah, and I think the big thing with the French is they've got different hats. And this might be a controversial opinion, but I do think that it's the hat that makes the army look different.
And that's why I want the Italians to be good.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they've got an amazing range of hats.
Yeah, exactly.
They're going to look brilliant on the battlefield. They're just not very good.
Yeah, especially because we have that classic, the 50 Shades of Feldgrau.
Yeah.
When you're running Hungarians and they're just wearing the German helmets, people just assume they're German a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Because there's not a lot to differentiate them. Yeah, the French in the US kit is a bit like that, where it's like, they're just it's just US, isn't it, with slightly different rules.
Yeah.
But once you put kepis on people and stuff like that, they're very obviously a different nation.
Yeah.
Because I can't tell. 28mm is quite a big skill, but I can't tell what rifle you're holding when I'm playing the game.
No, not at all, no.
But I can see your hat.
Yes. Even better if it's white, because it's a kepi.
Yeah. And then you can wave her around when you're ready to surrender.
I was waiting for that.
Yeah. So, once you decided you're going to start a specific army, like with your French, how did you get into them? Did you buy like specific boxes, like one-offs, or did you do a full army box, or did you just go eBay scouring?
What I didn't do was to buy one of the starter army box sets, controversially. So I know a lot of people start the game and they'll go and buy your German starter army, your British or Japanese or whatever. I didn't do it that way, and I don't. What I will do is, once I got the relevant campaign books and the relevant armies of books, start pen and paper and easy army and start building what I think looks like a decent force, and then I'll start working out the best way of actually getting hold of the models. I'm a huge fan of the weapons teams that have come out in the last, probably about 9 months now, isn't it? That Warlord's been doing. Yeah. The new resin weapons teams, because rather than going out and buying that starter army box where you're getting your plastic miniatures, you're getting your metal support weapons and your vehicles, for me now, if you go and buy 1 or 2 infantry box sets with the 30 plastics with your weapons teams, it means you're going to get your sniper. You're probably going to get your flamethrower, depending on the nation that you're playing. And then you can pad it out with things like your mortar team and your artillery. And if it's a fairly major nation, the chances are that people on eBay are going to be selling off the constituent parts of those bigger starter armies. So if I think about my Japanese, for example, I picked up two of the 30-man box sets pretty cheap in the Black Friday sale last November. And then things like the mortars and the howitzer and that kind of stuff were picked up off eBay or picked up off Facebook buy and sell groups as people were selling off the bits of the starter army they didn't want. Or if they had a duplicate howitzer, for example, they were selling off that second howitzer.
Yeah. The reason I have never bought the starter armies is usually I have a very specific build I'm going for. And the starter armies tend to be quite sort of a generalist build. And so I'm going to get... So maybe sort of 25% of it I might never use. And so they're great value. But then it's, well, actually, rather than having these models I don't need that I might end up selling or just keeping until I find a use for them, I might as well actually just spend more per model, as it were, but just buy exactly what I need. The one that actually I think has caught my eye because I think it's got very little superfluous stuff that you don't need is the new Allied Commando set, because that one is just your commandos, a tank, the Centaur, naturally.
Obviously, yeah.
Your mortar team, the medic, I think, is in there as well.
That's right, yeah.
And you've got, the only thing that I think people probably won't use is the medium machine gun team.
However, if you use the Late War Commando Theatre Selector from D-Day British and Canadian book, they do have a special rule. It's similar to the German NCO rule, where you don't automatically exceptionally kill commando team weapons. So there's a chance that you can get sniped, for example, with your MMG, and I think it's on a 3+ rather than a 2+. Someone else takes over because the units or the people in the units were trained up to the point where any one of them could fire. The Vickers, anyone could operate the mortar.
That's really good.
Yeah. Top tip from a commando player there.
Yeah, top Tommy's tips there. Yeah, because I like a machine gun. I run a machine gun with my US a lot, but I run them inexperienced because you can just about justify 35 points for a machine gun because it's an order dice. It's a bit of a hazard for the opponent. They can't just ignore it. 65 points for a veteran one. I can't justify that usually, but at least if you know you're not going to lose it on a single shot.
Automatically. Yeah, it is expensive. Yeah, obviously everything is veteran in this list because it's a commander list. So again, it's not a competitive choice, but it's not completely rubbish.
And their Piats have that same rule.
Yeah, it's mortars, snipers, Piats, any team weapons.
That's really good.
So, flamethrowers, etc. Yeah.
That's such a good rule for like the classic sniper battle.
Yeah.
Where the reason I don't bring a sniper is because most of the time I can't be bothered to play the game of you put yours down, I put mine down. Mm-hmm. Whoever gets first order dice, do they get lucky? Yes, they do. We'll play the rest of the game now. Mm-hmm. That just seems a waste of time to me most of the time. So my counter to that is just not to bring a sniper. But if my sniper could just ignore your sniper, amazing.
Yeah, I think the Commando box set is really good value because it's reasonably priced as well. It's a bit more expensive than the airborne, the US and the British airborne one, but it's nowhere near as expensive as the bigger box set. It's a nice price range, and I think actually you will use all the units, or certainly you'll use everything other than maybe the MG.
Yeah, but even then, if you model the machine gun team on separate bases, you might potentially use some of the loaders.
You can use the crew in other ways. Definitely.
And you're right. It's 65 quid, isn't it, from Warlord?
Yeah.
But I think Firestorm and Warlord Games will be a little bit cheaper.
Absolutely.
And obviously, you could use our affiliate link.
You could use the affiliate link. You'd get a discount,
which would help us.
It would help us,
and then we'll keep banging on about bolt action every week. I mean, they've released quite a few box sets recently, haven't they? What are the other ones that came out?
There was 3. So you had the British Commando, you had the French, obviously, which lots of people have been waiting for, which again I think is really good value. It doesn't have the medium howitzer. It has an anti-tank gun as the artillery
That's because
piece.
they listened to the episode on free units. Because the people like the anti-tank gun. They've heard that and they've thought we'll best throw it in.
And they've dived in there. But the rest of the box is absolutely great, I think. And there's a Soviet one as well. There's a 1940 to 43 Soviet box set. I think, again, it is good value. What I look at is what the anti-tank, or what the artillery piece is in the starter armies and what the vehicles are. And I think with that particular Soviet one, it's not bad at all in terms of what you get. It is the old style plastic infantry though, so you've got to stick on the arms and the weapons independently, which I know
that a lot.
Some people find frustrating. Yeah, but if you're building 60, 70 inexperienced chaffy Soviets, I can see that getting quite tiresome.
Yeah, but you see, I quite like that because what I'm looking at when I'm looking at the starter armies is what tank am I getting? Is it one that I'm actually going to use? And then how many men and what options? Because what I want to do is get loads of men, give them loads of different weapons so that actually I can have 1,000-point force with sort of 100 points of drop-ins where sometimes I'll run this squad with 4 SMGs, sometimes I'll run it with none. And so I need the number of men for the 1,000 plus the options men. And actually that's why the separate weapons to the arms thing, I don't mind as much because it gives you that flexibility to add the random weapons in, and you can also start like sprue hunting and kit bashing from your Germans to show they've got, here's my Stalingrad Soviets where they've captured these German weapons, and then he's got like a MP40 or something.
Yeah.
I did see the dice bag for the French as well. Is that new, or have they always done the French?
No, I think they've always had that. Yeah.
Yeah, because I do like them. I do find that the dice bags are a little bit small, but that might just be...
That's because you take 25 dice 1,000-point armies, or 30, as the case may be, with your French one that you were talking about.
But even so, I just find them a little bit... They're quite shallow, basically, is the problem. It's not the width, it's the depth, because what I find is when they're on the table, you can very easily see into the bag, and so you really do have to be a little bit careful when you're pulling to make sure it's not in eye line. Because unintentionally... Whenever I use one of the Warlord bags, I always find myself having a little look in, like when it's on the table without realising it. Oh, I've just looked in. Silly me.
You need to adopt the on the head, eyes closed, turn around, face the other way, draw a dice. There you go.
That's exactly what I do. I bring a big dice bag that I put over my head so that I can then pull the dice from the little dice bag. And then that way, no shenanigans.
In terms of the other starter army box sets, just to give a shout out to ones I think are worth looking at, the Winter German one I think is really good.
Those infantry are really good.
So you get 48, which is fantastic. Because of how they've put the sprue together, you can build them as late war, you can build them as mid war, so they work brilliantly for Battle of the Bulge. You can get your assault rifles and Panzerfaust if that's your bag. Equally, if you want to run them as late 1942, 43, Stalingrad, etc., you can kit them out, without the assault rifles and the Panzerfaust. You don't get an artillery piece that you're not going to use. It's got your mortar and the MG. You do get the Opel Blitz. And yes, it does come with a Panzer IV, but it's not like you don't ever see Panzer IVs in German armies. So I think the Winter German one, if I was going to buy a German starter army, it would be that one, or maybe the Fallschirmjäger starter box.
Yeah, I'd go Winter German just because that's my favourite plastic infantry set that Warlord actually sell. And also the Panzer IV is cool. I'm not sure I know they've shown the truck as the half-track version. I don't know if it can it be built as a normal truck?
Yeah, it's the Warlord. It's the Warlord plastic Opel Blitz, which you can do as the multi-A or the Opel Blitz. Yeah,
yeah, and I mean it's cool with the half-track. It's just I'd rather have the extra movement than the rough ground.
Yeah,
as we covered with the Indian pattern carrier when we discussed the Brens.
Speaking of Brens, so the British 8th Army box set is absolutely the one that I would recommend if you want a bunch of regular British guys. Obviously, it is geared towards North Africa, but you can, with a bit of kit bashing or with a bit of green stuff, you can stick some trousers on them and they'll be perfect for Sicily and Italy. And the reason I say the 8th Army one is worth getting is because you get a 25 pounder. It's the only British starter army with a 25 pounder. So you genuinely will actually use that artillery piece. Plus you get 2 Brens as well in the 8th Army box set. And you don't get a tank. So you're not paying for a tank that you wouldn't necessarily use. And you can obviously then go and add the tank in that you want with your 8th Army or Italy or Sicily force.
Yeah. Is that the one that comes with 2 artillery pieces?
Yes. Doesn't it come with a 25 pounder and a 6 pounder?
Oh, yeah, no, I wasn't doubting the 25 poundage. It was the 6 pounder that I'm thinking, am I going to run a 6 pounder? It's nice to have the option, I suppose.
I think it's the fact that the 25 pounder from Warlord is so expensive on its own that you get it within the starter army, which makes it worth as well.
How much is a 25 pounder on its own?
25 quid or something.
Oh, for a gun and three dudes. That is quite pricey.
Yeah, and you get the limber and all that.
I was going to say, they do that kit where you get the truck as well, don't you?
Which is like £40, yeah.
Is it? Oy, oy, oy.
£26 for a British 25 pounder.
I mean, I've got the Aussie one, I think.
Yeah, but that doesn't come with a gun shield.
Yeah, which is a little bit annoying, to be honest. But it's I got it because I like the hats. Because I thought it fitted the tropical theme better.
You could look at Rubicon because they do a plastic 25 pounder now.
Oh, do they?
Yeah.
That's a good inside scoop.
There you go. But it is only in North Africa uniform. So short sleeves and shorts.
The thing is, though, I'm sure if you've got Brits, especially if you buy the starter set, you've got enough spare models lying around that you could make yourself a crew.
Yes.
And so you could get yourself your second 25 pounder or even your first 25 pounder. The other thing I find with the Warlord artillery pieces and stuff is I find them really fiddly to assemble. And they don't come with instructions, do they?
No, you have to look on the community forum where they did release, didn't they, a few years ago, like about 6-7 years ago, a whole bunch of the instructions. Or you hunt around. I found this with the Germans. I was building a medium howitzer recently, and if you look at the, I think it's the Winter Germans have the medium howitzer instructions on the pictures on the Warlord website.
Yeah.
But if you look at the SS or early war version of the howitzer, they don't. So you have to do a bit of hunting and you'll find instructions.
Right. Okay. So they do exist then?
They do exist, yeah. A lot in the community section, in the forum section, a lot of the instructions are up there. That's
really funny because when I built the 7.2, the SDKF said 7.2 with the armoured cab, heavy autocannon on the back.
Yeah.
I was really looking for instructions for that because the half track itself, no problem. I understood it. The gun, though, there was lots of little pieces, like little cranks and stuff, where I looked at pictures. I knew where stuff went, but obviously it's like doing a jigsaw. Basically, it's like an extra element of hobby. And in the end, I ended up with a couple of spare pieces, but the gun looked like it looked like in the pictures that I saw from the period, and so job done. But I did wonder where those pieces were supposed to have gone, and so I imagine mine is not an historically accurate heavy autocannon, which is probably why it always misses.
But it looks like it from 3 foot away, and that'll do.
Yeah, it's got all the little wheels in all the right places and stuff for the crew to turn.
Okay.
But yeah, it's just such a funny thing to not have. I presume at some point they CAD'd them, and so you could have just screen grabbed the CAD.
Yes, I couldn't imagine that was how they did it. Yeah.
Maybe it's not some of the early guns actually, because the early ones are probably sculpted.
Also true. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe that's the crossover period. Maybe it's at some point, because I believe that everything is now digitally designed at Warlord. Because when we went to the open day, they showed us lots of digital files.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my final top tip for a starter army box set would be the Japanese.
Just because they're really good in the game.
It's just, other than MMG, but actually if you take the Japanese MMG squad rather than the MMG as a separate team, it's worth doing. Everything in the starter army is useful. And if you build the Chiha as a Shinhoto rather than as the light howitzer version of a Chiha, it is actually a pretty nifty little tank. You are going to need at least another 30 infantry with the Japanese because you get a lot of Japanese in that starter set, but you probably want some more. But in terms of having your medium mortar, all your different options with your plastic Japanese, the Chiha Shinhoto is a decent tank. And as I said, if you use the MMG as part of an MMG squad rather than as an MMG team, again, it's another little useful unit.
It would be quite fun if you're starting bolt action at the club to do a starter army face-off where you do because every box set has a 1,000-point list written up for it. And so it would be fun to say, everyone buys a starter army, you paint it up, we have a nice painting competition, and you have to use the list that Warlord have used as an example. Because, for example, I'm just looking now, the Japanese one, it's a first lieutenant with 2 buddies.
Yeah.
And so you're paying 100 points for that officer.
Yeah.
It immediately is a bit of a leveler because, that's not how you're going to build it competitively, is it?
Yeah, it is something I've thought about doing at the club, organising a little 1-day 3-game event where the restrictions are you have to basically bring a starter army or you have to build your force from a starter army box set. And obviously, if there isn't a nation that has a starter army box set, then there'll be certain restrictions in place. But I quite like the idea of let's go as vanilla as we possibly can and bring out your basic army and let's see how that does rather than adding in all of the extra units and all the different campaign books and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, I think it's an additional fun sort of element of randomness to use the specific army list on Warlord's website. Although obviously some will be better than others. And it also is quite nice because even your experienced players would be able to put together those army lists from the models they have in their collection.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so actually it would be quite fun. Maybe we should do that.
Yeah. So, Johnny, thinking about what we just discussed earlier on today, any ideas for what you might be bringing to the table in 2024, which you haven't previously done?
Norwegians, perhaps? I mean,
Maybe.
I did, after we did our Norwegian episode,
Yeah.
which, check it out if you haven't, they are really bad. I thought it was a really fun way to create sort of like a handicap for yourself because then any position above the wooden spoon you get feels amazing. And what I thought was I could do a whole sort of like ski force basically where everyone's on skis and the problem is I couldn't find many ski models. Like there's quite a few out there, but a lot of them are metal, sort of trying to get them to work. Try and make them unique as well, because I was thinking about just using the Finnish ski squad that's available on Warlord's site. But I use those models for my Finns as well, so it suffers that thing that I was saying earlier where your models look very similar. It doesn't justify, there's not enough rule of cool there to justify doing that. So that was one I was thinking about. The other one, I would like at some point to play Japanese because I do think they are the strongest underrepresented nation in bolt action. Like they are one that I avoid playing against, if possible, at tournaments because they're sort of my natural enemy. Because now that they can't be hurt by flames, they feel really overpowered. If I'm honest, and so I would like to play them because there's often times when I see this on the other side where people will say certain things are overpowered, but then having played them for quite a lot of time, it becomes really obvious what the counter is. And sort of like, and when you're controlling them, it doesn't feel that powerful because actually it's been sort of built up. And I think Japanese might be a bit like that. And so I'd like to play them just sort of experimentally to see if they are as good as I think they are, because I actually think they are sort of S tier, sort of one of the best armies in the game.
Okay.
And what about you?
So it's going to be Cossacks and Eastern Front Germans. So I've just bought a load of metal Great Escape early to mid-war Germans to go along with the Cossacks. I've kind of unofficially set myself a little task of mainly or only playing Axis forces in 2024 at major events. So I've already thought about things like Beachhead and the Welsh Nationals and the Welsh Open. Obviously, it's assuming that the packs are similar to what they have been previously, if they haven't yet been announced. So I've kind of got an idea in mind for most of the big events for next year, which are all going to be Axis forces. Yeah,
I think I'm going to go Allies for Welsh Open next year because it's just so many Brits. which it was set in a way where the Brits prep bombardment was sort of semi-nerfed because we didn't have many prep missions, but it just gets a little bit samey playing the Brits all the time, I find, which is what happens quite a bit at big tournaments. Like, Brits are always popular because we're in Britain, so you've got a historical reason to run Brits. They've got lots of cool units, so you've got that reason to run them. They've got loads of different ways you can build them, so regardless of play style, there's a reason to run them.
They're really competitive if you build them in a certain way.
Exactly. Yeah. And so there's really like so many reasons why British tournaments are dominated by Brits, British armies. And so I think any tournament where I'm going Axis versus Allies, I'm going to try and stay on the Allies side and play something that isn't Brits. Partly so that I don't have to play Brits all the time, but also to give my opponent a bit of a reprieve where you've had 3 Brit games, now you've got something different, whether it's French or Norwegians.
Yeah. I really like the look of the recent Dutch KNIL Kickstarter, which has been massively pushed on Facebook. And if I hadn't kind of already planned out ideas for next year, I would seriously look at that because the Dutch are actually quite a strong force for a minor nation.
Absolutely.
And definitely underrepresented, like you said earlier, about being a little bit niche or a bit scarce. I think I've seen one Dutch force, which was not this year's, but the previous year's Welsh Open. Yeah,
they are really good. And this is one of the things we've seen with the Finns, actually, where the Finns were under-repped and really good. Now you start to see quite a lot of Finns. I mean, not huge amounts, not anywhere near as many as Brits, but you're seeing them sort of often enough that, okay, they're not like an unseen anymore. And so I would, for my next minor nation, I'd like to go to one where I think it'll be some time before they become common. And I think the Dutch are soon going to have a day in the sun where we see them quite often because you're right. I'm looking forward to doing the Armies of episode on them because there's a lot of good stuff in that army book.
And a lot of it comes down to model availability, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The reason why you're going to see a lot more French armies in the next 12 months is because Warlord have released, the new plastics, and they scale, obviously, with the previously available Warlord support weapons, not to mention the new resin weapons teams.
Where did you get your Great Escape models from?
From Great Escape.
Oh, direct from them. Fair enough.
So Great Escape do a really good army builder option. So you can buy like the individual units, or you can basically build your own army. So I use that option, and I'd already written the list I had in mind, or variations of a list I had in mind. So I kind of knew what I was looking at. So I put together, using their online army builder, put together that pack. And then the Cossacks were from Crusader miniatures.
Nice.
And they scale well. Great Escape and Crusader scale well together.
We'll really need to get some sponsorships on the good up where the amount of names we're dropping.
Yeah, if people are listening.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, thank you for listening. If we've lit a spark of interest in you in a brand new force, check out the affiliate links in the description. Please do leave us a review if you enjoy it. If you don't, I suppose leave us a review as well so we can get better.
And it's ta-ta for now from me.
And it's ta-ta for now from him.